Hey neighbor, welcome back to the middle of the woods. My name is John, and I can't even believe I'm already saying this, but it's time for a review of the surprise release Folklore, the 8th album from the seasoned veteran herself, Taylor Swift. Taylor is arguably the biggest and most successful artist of the 21st century, yet it's come at the price of her privacy, sanity, and overall stability, considering the crash course the media has put her on since the day she started putting her relationships to music. Tides have come and gone, and the 2010s saw some of the most tumultuous years of her career, going from the wide-eyed innocent country sound of Speak Now to the synth-pop machine 1989 and the very dark Reputation, all in just a few years. Something changed after the old Taylor couldn't come to the phone anymore, and as we enter the wooded world of Folklore, I've realized the internal evolution was really just the death of ego, or the acceptance of things she can't control. Containing the narrative in regards to how the public eye views you is something that anyone with an audience struggles with, and while she tried to right the ship with 2019's Lover, which admittedly is a solid album, it left her torn between two worlds that lacked cohesion. This is the album I've been waiting for Taylor to make since the release of 1989 6 years ago. I was brimming with excitement based on the announcement alone, wondering if she'd bake up a record akin to her outstanding Hunger Games contribution Safe and Sound with the Civil Wars, and without a doubt, she delivered the indie folk goods with hints of electronic, soft rock, and chamber pop that strays so far off the beaten path most would expect her to take. One of the most commendable things about LP8 is that Taylor took a break from making herself the star of every show. Whether you'd like to admit it to yourself or not, she's actually a masterful songwriter that's penned some of the best hit songs of the century, despite some of her missteps that I've absolutely been hypercritical of. But what many might forget is that I've been a fan dating back to 2006 or 2007, and I got no joy in tearing down the creation she built up. I simply knew she could do better, and Folklore is the living proof I can point to and scream from a mountaintop, "See? I told you!" Isolation in light of a global pandemic got Taylor's gears spinning into motion, leading her to connect virtually with members of the indie rock band The National, most prominently Aaron Dessner, and her longtime collaborator Jack Antonoff to help record and produce this record. Was she gunning to please the indie crowd or the critics at large? Maybe, but after spending a significant amount of time listening, I'll take her at her word when she says she didn't overthink this or try to make it something it's not. Folklore is an emotionally wounded record that sees Swift putting herself in the shoes of other women, including her past self. Her imagination lights up the room with a palpable sensation, one that might be slow-moving, but given the proper attention, you'll come to find that it's anything but boring. Really, it's just an intimate experience that sees Taylor finally standing up, unafraid of failing, no longer worried with the idea of not having an obvious charting smash single to lead the parade. The fact that it is so unexpected and unconventional on so many levels is a big part of the charm. And no, that's not me saying, oh, it's great because it's a surprise release and we weren't expecting it. It's great because Taylor dialed into her strengths and brought out the beauty in the process of healing and letting go. She doesn't get hung up on one particular theme all that often. Instead, she hangs up the ghosts of her past and makes them into stories you'd tell by the campfire in the hopes of passing them on to a future generation. Taylor might be the mastermind here, but to not single out her collaborators and shine praise on the gloomy array of strong instrumentation would be a massive failure on my end. So expect everything from lush pianos to violins to electric guitar, tempered percussion, saxophones, acoustics. It's a gorgeous, haunting mix that will transport you into this world they painted, guided by her words, but propelled further by the richness of the music. The production on this record is immaculate. An intimate record that pushes the idea of realistic sadness, witch hunts, and self-respect against all odds is a breath of fresh air. Upbeat songs to try and make the world feel good during these trying times are fine, but I just kind of prefer this honesty that's not overly reliant on cheesy tropes, something that connects on a deeper level even if it's not perfect, and that's exactly what Folklore passes down. Taylor's voice sounds better on record than it has in years. There's a warm richness in the way she calmly breathes life into these stories that creep into the back of your mind. Closing your eyes with a pair of headphones elevates the experience and gives you the feeling of a friend quietly sharing their hopes and fears with you. And the fact that she writes from so many different angles makes it even more fascinating to me. But even with all of those positives stacking up so high, it's a Taylor Swift record, so you know we gotta talk about the fact that she's always had trouble not knowing when to stop. This album is about 15 minutes too long, it starts to lag at its second half, and maybe part of that has to do with the similar sound that so many of them are expressing, but I'd actually argue against that in the long run. The record's cohesion is a strength, not a weakness. It's almost just too much of a good thing when the door could have been pulled shut a little bit sooner. You see, I say that, but realistically, I don't even know which tracks I'd cut. There's certainly a few that could have been chopped down individually to make specific songs shorter and more condensed, but at the end of the day, it's a relatively small criticism for a winning album that really puts its hooks in me each time I come back. With there being 16 tracks on the standard album, I'm realistically not going to be able to cover them all, but I want to touch on some of the key moments that really made this album catch fire in my eyes. Don't take it personally if I don't mention a song by name, but you'll probably know exactly what I'm referring to if I do happen to describe some of the others in passing without directly saying their name. Naturally, I'll start at track 5, which, as any fan of hers would tell you, is the slot she saves for some of the most emotional material on her albums. Last time it was my favorite track, The Archer, a dreamy synth ballad that compared love and war and everything in between, and this time, it's again the most exceptional song, My Tears Ricochet. Holy shit, the waterworks are certainly running at full steam on this one, and I'll be damned if it's not one of the best songs she's ever written. With a trembling synth acting as the spine and her pained voice relaying a message that I can't help but think is about her ex, or maybe somebody at Big Machine Records, it's beside the point considering the punch hits just as hard whether you knew about the relationship or not. Side note, when was the last time you heard the word ricochet in a song? I can't think of one, honestly, and I love that word. It's underrated. Maybe that's part of the reason why it's so effective for me. It just keeps building and nailing these crescendos after starting off so skeletal, adding in this eye-opening imagery that really takes you to the depth of this tragic demise. Nostalgia is a massive wave that washes over the ears on this release, and sure, some of that could be attributed back to the songs Jack Antonoff produced and played on, but it actually extends past that in terms of scope. For example, the Aaron Dessner-produced Seven calls back to Taylor's childhood friend who struggled with a family that wasn't very accepting or open. It's such a mesmerizing piece of the puzzle because you can feel the earnest concern in her singing, evoked even further by the distant-sounding cellos and piano. Something I noticed immediately on the record is that many of the songs have ties to her past works, and after further inspection, I saw that Taylor has confirmed that loads of Easter eggs were hidden in plain sight, including a 3-song arc she labeled the Teenage Love Triangle. Gotta love a well-done trilogy, and all 3 songs, Cardigan, August, and Betty, are all fantastic additions to the album in their own right, without seeming too desperate to force a tie that binds them. I mean, Betty has a great narrative to it, I love the harmonica, Cardigan was the single that got the music video, and it's really just an excellent portrayal of the situation that somebody found themselves in. It has nostalgia to it, and it has an innocence in its eyes, but it doesn't feel forced. Despair hangs in the air on the stinging breakup ballad Exile featuring Justin Vernon of Bon Iver. I love that Taylor handed him the spotlight to open the track, adding a deep resonating tone to add the feeling of separation between two people that both of them actually do incredibly well. Taylor's perspective kicks in on the second verse and does an excellent job at painting a very bleak portrait, bringing Justin back later to pair up their voices that sound so beautiful, so crisp, together in harmony. I appreciate the dreamy atmosphere This Is Me Trying brings to the table. It's got these light-kicking drums, sentimental synthesizers, and a really emotional vocal performance that's doused in reverb that fits the mood incredibly well. Mad Woman struck a similar chord for me, but instead of sadness, it kind of nudges forward this idea of women being patronized in all walks of life. Compared to songs like The Man that she's written in the past, this laid-back, folky, indie atmosphere suits the subject matter so much better than a bubbly pop song. The line, "Women like hunting witches too," was kind of brilliant. I really liked the way she approached the topic without beating you over the head. Speaking of women that were exiled for some ridiculous reason, can we just take a moment to appreciate how great The Last Great American Dynasty is? Because it's fucking amazing and calls all the way back to albums like Fearless musically and even vocally with its innocent sound, with a more of an indie approach, I guess, instead of country. This is what I was talking about earlier with the way that Taylor writes on folklore. She has an attachment to the subject considering she now owns the legendary Holiday House mansion that once belonged to Rebecca Harness. The vocal layering meshes organically with the subtle drum loop, and the bridge will make you smile so big as you remember what made her stand out as an artist in the first place. Hazy nostalgia bleeds from the heart of other cuts such as Mirrorball, which is nice but a bit too stagnant, the distant epiphany, which elicits a feeling of ancient times long before any of us were probably alive, almost a choral cathedral aesthetic or something, and the closing track Hoax. Lyrically, she calls back to my favorite song My Tears Ricochet, along with some religious imagery that she's no stranger to conjuring up, and musically, I'd say that this kind of feels like a Disney movie with its music that actually doesn't have the happy ending. It's called life, kids, it's not always perfect. Enjoy! Some might be surprised at the amount of cursing on this record. Oh no, she's saying dirty words. It's so bad, it's so evil. But I'm over here just thinking Taylor actually managed to make a move that shell-shocked the hell out of me in 2020, 15 years into her superstar career. I wasn't sure what I expected on a follow-up to Lover, but the final product received is leagues better in terms of cohesion, emotion, passion, and musicality. She excelled on nearly every level, and I can't wait to listen to this record in the heart of fall, with a bonfire blazing and the yearning realism soundtracking that cold season of life. I love this record, it's a huge return to form for Taylor Swift, and I'm giving Folklore a 4.5 out of 5. Did this record catch your attention? Was a surprise release a good idea? I'm personally all for it. I do like the more laid-back Taylor, and I seriously hope that you'll give this record a chance even if you're not really a fan. Go check out my review of Lover by tapping here, see my top 10 favorite Taylor songs by tapping here, and follow my socials that you see on screen at the links in the description down below. Other than that, I'll be back soon for more on ARTV.